Why did 30 million people report the exact same experience at the moment of death, regardless of their culture or religion, and without ever having met one another? What explains the fact that people born blind are able to visually describe the colors of the doctor's clothes and physical details of the operating room while they were clinically dead? The answer will permanently change the way you view your own existence. Death has always been the great event horizon, that dark point where our knowledge stopped and fear began. For thousands of years, all we had were assumptions, sacred texts, and the hope that there was something more than silence. We built temples and created rituals to deal with the terror of the unknown, trying to guess what exists on the other side. But the era of guessing is over. Today we live in a time where even humanity's oldest mystery can be subjected to a cold and merciless analysis. We stopped believing and started verifying. We decided to conduct an experiment that seemed impossible just a decade ago. We set aside theology and philosophy and turned to pure statistics. We utilized the processing power of Axiom to search for hidden patterns in a volume of data that no human being could read in a lifetime. The goal was ambitious and, for many, frightening: to load everything humanity knows about the final moment into the system and ask the machine for an answer. We did not want comfort. We wanted the truth. The database that fed this analysis was named the Thanatos Archive. We are talking about 30 million reports. These are 30 million unique cases where the heart stopped, the electroencephalogram showed a flat line, and death was confirmed by medical teams. Yet these people came back. And they did not come back empty-handed. They brought memories. We gathered records from intensive care units in Tokyo, New York, Moscow, and Cape Town. We digitized diaries of 19th century researchers, translations of Tibetan texts, and medieval accounts. We mixed testimonies from convinced atheists, Christians, Buddhists, and people who had never heard of any divine concept. We gave all of this to Axiom to process, and we waited. Many skeptics will immediately say that the near-death experience is just a hallucination of a brain that is shutting down. They will say it is the final fireworks display of neurons deprived of oxygen, or a chemical discharge to alleviate the pain of the end. Official science has clung to this version for decades because it is comfortable. It allows one to close the case file and not think about the impossible, but the data ignores comfort and focuses on probabilities. And the first conclusion, drawn from just 3% of the archive, sounded like a death sentence for the purely materialist view of the world. The probability of these reports being a coincidence is practically zero. If they were hallucinations, they would be chaotic. A hallucination is personal, built upon your fears, your dreams, and your specific culture. But the system found the opposite. A rigid and immutable structure was detected. More than a dream, it is a protocol. And this protocol is identical for a stockbroker who overdosed in 2023 and for a peasant in medieval France dying of the plague. The gravity of this appears in the physical details. The system isolated 7 million cases of what we call out-of-body experiences. We are not talking merely about a vague sensation of lightness. We are talking about a precise geometric shift of the observation point. We cross-reference the floor plans of resuscitation rooms with the descriptions provided by patients after their return. The accuracy of the details reaches almost 100%. Case 49 Alpha is the best example. The patient was a 52-year-old engineer who suffered a massive heart attack. His clinical death lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. According to medical protocols, his brain was shut down without blood, incapable of processing any sensory information. However, upon waking, he described every movement of the medical team. More than that, he cited the serial number written on a tag on the top of the defibrillator. That number was in a zone physically invisible to anyone lying on the stretcher. He also described a blue folder left behind by a nurse on top of a tall cabinet. What is the chance of an oxygen-deprived brain inventing a reality with such precision, including objects outside the field of vision? Axiom had no doubts. Modeling this is impossible. The data was obtained by external observation. The patient's point of perception was, in fact, floating near the ceiling. This is a physical fact, confirmed by thousands of cross-referenced cases. But this was only the beginning. To eliminate any doubt that people might just be repeating stories they had heard, we looked for anomalies. And we found a group of data that destroys any skeptical argument. The reports from people born blind. In the Thanatos archive, there are 243 cases of people with total blindness since birth. These people have never seen light. They do not know what perspective or shadow is. Their visual cortex is atrophied or non-existent. They perceive the world only through sound and touch. However, the study reveals that, at the moment of death, they began to see. They described lights, saw their own bodies on the stretcher, saw the colors of the wires on the heart monitors. One specific case of a blind musician is disturbing. Upon returning from the coma, he described for the first time the appearance of his wife, who was crying in the hallway. He even noted that the pattern of her dress did not match the color of her shoes. Semantic study confirmed he was not using metaphors. It was a direct visual description. For the mind of a blind person to create this, it would be necessary to build the entire visual system from scratch and learn concepts of color and shape in seconds while dying. Biologically, this does not happen. The result is simple and shocking. Vision in these cases did not happen through physical eyes. The eyes are merely lenses, but the one who sees is not the brain. And when the organ dies, the observer does not go blind. On the contrary, the observer begins to see with a clarity they never had in life. We are dealing with a migration process. It is a transfer, not the end. The filter removed the noise of cultural interpretations and religious fears, leaving only the raw schematic of the process. But if there is a transfer, if there is a signal leaving the broken transmitter, where does it go? During the analysis, we found a strange phenomenon that occurs in the first few minutes after death, when doctors have already declared the passing and there is no apparent electrical activity. The instruments, when adjusted to maximum sensitivity, pick up coherent and organized surges in the deep neural structures. For a long time, this was dismissed as reading errors or final spasms, but we amplified the resolution and discovered that it is not noise. It is a transmission of compressed, dense, and ordered data. The brain is dead, but someone is using the biological equipment one last time to send a final report. And in this deafening silence, the moment of greatest activity you will ever experience takes place. When doctors look at the monitor and see the flat line, there is a universal consensus that the person is gone. The heart has stopped pumping, the blood has stalled in the veins, and without oxygen, the cells should begin to turn off the lights one by one. Conventional medicine taught us that 30 seconds after cardiac arrest, brain activity drops to zero. It is the end of the transmission. Absolute silence. The person you loved no longer exists, leaving only a biological body beginning its natural process of disintegration. But we decided to look for activity exactly where it should not exist. We monitored 5,000 patients who passed away in intensive care units, connected to high-precision equipment, and what we found defies everything written in biology textbooks. The silence is an illusion. Minutes after confirmed clinical death, when the brain should be inert, it explodes into activity. We're not talking about random spasms of dying neurons. We are talking about a perfectly organized electrical storm. A phenomenon called a gamma burst occurs. In daily life, your brain produces gamma waves only during moments of extreme concentration, when you solve a difficult problem or have a brilliant idea. It is the frequency of maximum clarity. What we discovered is that in a dead brain, this activity is dozens of times more intense than when the person was alive and awake. Here, the physics of life breaks down. Where does a system without a battery, without glucose, and without oxygen get the energy for this Olympic performance? The standard explanation has always been hypoxia. Skeptics say that the lack of oxygen causes the brain to short-circuit, firing random signals. But we tested this theory. Lack of oxygen generates chaos, noise, and disorder. The signal should weaken and break apart. What we saw on the charts was the opposite of chaos. We saw perfect synchrony. Areas of the brain that normally do not converse much with each other, such as the visual part and the memory part, suddenly connect with absolute harmony. It is as if, in an office where the power went out, all the computers turned on by themselves at maximum power to perform an urgent and coordinated task before the residual energy runs out. To understand the purpose of this, we looked at an old study done with rats at the University of Michigan, and reanalyzed the raw data. The pattern found in the animals at the moment of death was identical to the human one. There was a structure of phases, very similar to the process of compressing important files before sending them. Nature is economical. It does not waste resources. If you are just a biological organism that is going to cease to exist, it makes no sense to spend the last drop of energy organizing memories. This final surge only has logic if there is a need to transfer data outward. The amount of information processed in these few seconds is colossal. The firing speed of the neurons is so high that it explains why so many people say they saw their entire life pass before their eyes. Far from being nostalgia or imagination, it is a high-speed data dump. The brain is scanning every memory, every smell, every face, and every emotion, packaging all of this into a dense and complex signal. Many try to explain these visions with chemistry. They talk about DMT, a substance the body supposedly releases at the time of death, causing hallucinations. But Axiom's quantitative analysis knocks down this hypothesis for a simple mechanical reason: circulation. For a drug to take effect and create a complex and structured hallucination, it needs to travel through the blood to the right receptors. But the heart has stopped. The blood is not moving. A chemical reaction is too slow to explain the instant synchrony we see throughout the entire brain at the same time. The only explanation left takes us to the frontier of quantum physics. The signal is not traveling via chemical reactions, but via coherence. Where chemistry fails, electricity and vibration take over. We analyze the impressive record of patient Beta 7, an 87-year-old man who died while being monitored for seizure detection. We had for the first time the complete and non-stop recording of death. At the exact moment his heart stopped, the left hemisphere of the brain, responsible for logic and language, began to shut down. But the right hemisphere, the home of intuition, art, and creativity, lit up like a bonfire. Then the two sides entered a rare synchrony. Patient Beta 7 was not just dying. He was entering a state of superconsciousness. He was more awake in that final moment than he had been for years. This creates a time paradox. Since the processing frequency is extremely high, the patient's perception of time changes drastically. What lasts 2 minutes of resuscitation attempts for the doctors in the room can seem like hours, days, or even an eternity to the patient's consciousness. Time ceases to be a straight line and expands. The most unsettling datum of this investigation is the direction of this last electrical scream. The electromagnetic field generated does not simply dissipate into the air like heat. It has direction. There is a vector orientation in the signal, as if it were looking for a connection. The radio only picks up the music. It does not create it. If you smash the radio with a hammer, the music stops playing in the room, but the radio wave continues to exist in the air. What we observe in hospitals is the moment the receiver breaks, and the signal perceiving the critical failure in the equipment disconnects. This surge of energy is consciousness's attempt to liberate itself from the biology that no longer functions. Now that we know the signal is not extinguished but ejected, we need to follow its trail. It does not stay hovering in the hospital room. It enters a specific transport channel. Millions of people have described this channel as a dark tunnel with a light at the end, and science spent years saying this was just the eye failing. But the data shows it has nothing to do with the eyes. It is a real physical structure, and we are going to enter it to understand how it is possible to travel faster than the speed of light without leaving the spot. What happens to the electrical and conscious signal that was ejected from the dying brain? It does not remain hovering aimlessly on the ceiling of the hospital room. It immediately enters a transport structure that popular culture has turned into a cliché of cheap movies and books, the famous tunnel with a light at the end. For decades, serious science rolled its eyes at this report, treating it as folklore or hallucination. But when we set aside prejudice and look at the geometry of this phenomenon, we realize we are dealing with something much more complex than a vision failure. The standard medical explanation for the tunnel has always been retinal ischemia. When blood pressure drops, peripheral vision darkens first, leaving only a central point of light. Doctors say it is like looking through a straw, and the brain interprets this as a tunnel. But this theory has a massive hole when compared to the real data of survivors. Loss of vision due to fainting is static. It is a dark spot that closes slowly. What people describe in the near-death experience is movement. It is a violent acceleration. To understand the difference between fainting and traveling, we analyzed reports from those who understand speed and loss of consciousness, fighter pilots and astronauts. Case Vector 4 is enlightening. An experienced pilot, accustomed to withstanding extreme gravitational forces in centrifuges and aerial combat, suffered a cardiac arrest during surgery. He knew exactly what tunnel vision caused by a lack of blood to the brain was like. He had felt it many times in the cockpit. But what he described on the operating table had nothing to do with the body's functioning. He was not losing vision. He was gaining a hyper-consciousness. He described being pulled into a cylindrical structure with geometrically perfect walls, traveling at a speed that seemed to exceed that of sound. There was no sensation of blacking out, but rather of absolute clarity and an expansion of the space around him. He was not fainting. He was taking off. Axiom processed thousands of similar descriptions and identified a pattern in the shape of this tunnel. It is never described as a smooth, straight tube. It is always a spiral. The walls often seem made of swirling clouds, luminous honeycombs, or rings of pulsating energy. In nature, spiral movement is the most efficient way to transport energy. Water drains in a spiral, hurricanes spin, galaxies coil. This passage follows this same universal law of flow. There is also the sound. Almost 1/3 of people not only saw the tunnel but heard it. They describe a deep hum, an intense vibration, or a sound similar to a strong wind or gigantic bells ringing in the distance. This sound has specific frequencies that coincide with what theoretical physics predicts for the distortion of space-time. It is the sound of a gravitational warp. What we are seeing here is not a visual hallucination, but the crossing of an Einstein-Rosen bridge, a wormhole connecting two distant realities. Biological matter cannot pass through this type of portal, but pure information can. At the moment of death, the body is left behind like an empty shell, and consciousness, now converted into pure data, is sucked into this transfer channel. The sensation of flying at high speed is not imagination. It is the subjective perception of being transmitted across a network. And here, people born blind return to the equation. How could a person who has never seen perspective, who does not know what visual depth is or how train tracks converge on the horizon, hallucinate a perfect three-dimensional tunnel? Their brain does not have the necessary image files to build this illusion. However, blind people describe the same journey, with the same geometry, and the same sensation of rapid movement toward a focal point. The tunnel exists independently of the eyes. It is a structure that consciousness perceives directly, without needing a retina or optic nerve. The speed of this journey varies from person to person, and this seems to be linked to the emotional state of the one departing. Those who die suddenly with fear, attached to material goods or full of regrets, often describe the crossing as slow and heavy. They feel as if they are swimming against the current or being dragged through a viscous substance, whereas those who accept the departure, who lived with lightness or practiced detachment, report an instant shot. In the blink of an eye, they are already on the other side. The corridor reacts to who passes through it. It reads the density of your vibration. And not all tunnels go to the same place. There is a small but significant percentage of reports that describe a downward movement. About 4% of people speak of tunnels that do not lead to light, but to cold, dark, and oppressive places. The walls do not shine. They seem made of damp earth or rusted metal, and the sounds are not harmonious, but screams and unpleasant mechanical noises. It may seem like religious moralism, but the physics of this phenomenon suggests it is a matter of specific weight. Just as oil floats on water and stone sinks, consciousness loaded with dense emotions like hatred, extreme cruelty, or deep selfishness tends to be pulled down to lower frequencies. The tunnel functions as a centrifuge that separates souls based on their internal vibration. But for the vast majority, the journey ends in the light. And this light at the end of the tunnel is not just a bright glow. People say it is brighter than 1,000 suns, but paradoxically, it does not hurt the eyes and casts no shadows. This happens because it is not physical light made of photons. It is living information. Upon approaching it, the person does not feel heat, they feel knowledge and unconditional love. It is as if the light were made of pure intelligence. Often, the journey is interrupted. Thousands of reports speak of an invisible barrier inside the tunnel or just at its exit. The person feels that if they take one more step, they will not be able to return. And then, a voice, which is not heard by ears but felt in the mind, says that it is not yet time. The contract has not been fulfilled. The tunnel then reverses the flow and spits the consciousness back into the painful body in the hospital bed. But for those who cross over, the exit of the tunnel is not the end of the trip. It is just the disembarkation. Consciousness has just arrived at the main server, and now begins the most difficult and revealing stage of all, the review of the personal file. Forget the bearded judge. It is a direct and unfiltered confrontation with who you really were. What happens in the second following the exit from the tunnel, when consciousness is ejected into the space of light? Popular culture taught us to expect a divine court, with angels noting down our sins in a golden book. But the real data from the Thanatos archive shows something much more sophisticated and technologically impossible for our linear brain to comprehend. There is no external judgment, there is no furious judge, and there is no time for excuses. What exists is the panorama archive. The phrase "I saw my whole life flash before my eyes" has become a cliché so worn out that we stopped paying attention to what it really means. But when we analyze the reports of millions of people who returned from this state, we discover that this is not a poetic metaphor. It is a precise technical description of an instant data download process. Look at the problem of time. Most near-death experiences last between 2 and 5 minutes on the emergency room clock. Sometimes it is just a few seconds of cardiac arrest. Yet survivors swear they relived every moment of their lives, from the first cry in the nursery to the last breath on the stretcher, with complete sensory details. They smelled the breakfast from 30 years ago, felt the texture of the clothes they wore at school, and the breeze on their face on any given summer day. Axiom calculated the compression rate necessary for this to be possible. If an average life is 70 years, and the review lasts 3 earthly seconds, the processing speed would have to exceed the speed of light. No biological neuron can fire that fast. The result is that this event happens outside of linear time. The person enters a state of spherical time where past, present, and future exist simultaneously, as if life were an entire movie unrolled in the palm of one's hand. But the most terrifying aspect of the panorama archive is not the speed but the perspective. During life, we are the protagonists of our own movie. We see everything from the inside out, justifying our actions and ignoring how they affect others. In the panorama archive, this selfish bubble bursts. You do not just watch what you did, you feel what you caused. The case of the aggressor shows this brutally. A 30-year-old man with a history of violence and crimes died temporarily after being stabbed in a fight. During his review, he was transported back to the moment he beat an innocent victim years earlier. But this time, he was not in the aggressor's body. He was inside the victim. He felt the paralyzing terror, the physical pain of the blows breaking his bones, and the deep humiliation of being dominated. He lived the suffering he himself created, without any filter or mitigation. This role reversal reveals a fundamental law of the physics of consciousness. Empathy is not a moral choice, it is an automatic mechanism of the universe. We are all connected in a single network. When you hurt another person, the system registers that pain as yours, but your physical body possesses blocks that prevent you from feeling it immediately. Death removes these blocks. All the pain you caused returns to the source with compound interest. On the other hand, good also returns amplified. The case of the orchid lady is a luminous example. During her review, she saw a forgotten scene from her youth, when she was 20 years old. She was late for work, and passing by a girl crying in a park, stopped for a second, smiled, and gave her a flower she was carrying. For her, it was an insignificant gesture, but in the panorama, she felt the impact of that action on the girl's soul. The child, who felt abandoned and planned to run away from home that day, received that smile as a sign that the world still held goodness. That moment changed the girl's brain chemistry and altered the course of her life forever. The lady felt a wave of gratitude and love so intense she described it as if it could light up an entire city. The universe does not measure the size of the gesture, but the emotional charge and the intention behind it. An unexpressed kind thought has weight. A secret anger has weight. Yes, even thoughts are visible. There is no privacy in the panorama archive. Everything you thought, felt, or desired in secret is projected in high definition around you. The envy you hid behind a fake smile appears as a dark, sticky substance. The silent prayer you said for a stranger appears as a beam of pure light. You see yourself completely naked, transparent, and without masks. We need to rethink who we are. If every internal movement is recorded, are we merely actors on a surveilled stage? The data indicates that the goal of this total record is not punishment, but learning. The universe is learning about itself through us. We are probes sent into the density of matter to collect unique experiences. When the probe returns to base, the data is extracted for analysis, not to judge if the probe got dirty with mud, but to understand the composition of the mud. And you are not alone in this projection room. Almost all reports mention the presence of a companion by your side, a figure made of light, a guide or mentor. People give religious names to this figure, calling it a guardian angel, Jesus, or Buddha, depending on their culture. But the function is always the same. He is the curator of the archive. He does not judge. He does not point fingers. He watches with you, pausing the important scenes to show the invisible connections. He shows how that failure you thought was the end of the world actually strengthened you for a greater challenge 5 years later. He shows how that painful loss opened space for something new. The curator helps interpret the movie of your life with compassion and humor, often laughing at our silly worries and unfounded fears. At the end of the review, this being usually asks a question that has nothing to do with financial success or social status. The question varies, but the core is always the same. How much have you learned to love? Or, what did you do with the gift of life that was given to you? It is a question about the quality of your energy, not the quantity of your achievements. But who are these beings of light? And who are the relatives who often appear to welcome us even before the review begins? But we need to focus on these presences. Are they really our grandparents and friends? Or are they something much older and more complex, using familiar faces so as not to scare us? The experience of death, contrary to what most imagine, is not a dive into absolute loneliness. There is no moment where you find yourself floating alone in the void with no one around. On the contrary, the reports from the Thanatos archive overwhelmingly confirm that the other side is a place of meetings, and that you are expected. For skeptics, the explanation is simple and convenient. The dying brain, in a last act of desperation to calm itself, projects comforting images of loved ones. It is a psychological regression, a search for safety. If you see your deceased grandmother, it is because your mind is trying to tell you that everything is okay. However, Axiom detected a pattern that dismantles this theory with the precision of a scalpel. If these visions were hallucinations of comfort, they should follow the logic of our desires. But the entities found in the contact zone often act autonomously and surprisingly. They say things the dying person does not want to hear, like, "You need to go back. It is not your time yet," expelling the person from a place of absolute peace back to a body wrecked by pain. This fundamentally contradicts the pleasure principle that governs defense hallucinations. The proof that the mind did not invent this comes from the phenomenon known as Pekindarian. This strange name refers to cases where the dying person sees someone who, to their knowledge, was still alive. The case of patient Sigma 9 is a disturbing example. A young man suffered a severe car accident and went into a coma. During his near-death experience, he saw himself in a corridor of light and met a childhood friend smiling at him. Upon waking, he told his family about the vision, who were confused, as that friend lived in another city and was fine. 2 hours later, the news arrived. The friend had died in another car accident, just 15 minutes before patient Sigma 9's experience. No one in the hospital room knew this. The information was not available in the physical world. The only logical explanation is that the meeting really happened in a space where communication transcends biology. But who exactly are these figures we meet? The reports describe deceased relatives, but they do not appear as we remember them in their final days. A grandmother who died at 90, consumed by cancer, appears young, radiant and healthy, appearing to be 30 years old. Amputated limbs are restored, the skin glows. In the afterlife, consciousness projects an ideal image of itself, free from the marks of physical decay. It is like a perfect digital avatar. We are not the body that ages and fails. We are the energy that inhabits it. And when the body falls, the energy returns to its original and full form. Beyond relatives, there is a category of beings that never had a human body known to the traveler. They are described as beings of light, guides, or angels. The appearance of these entities varies according to the culture of the one seeing them, which might seem like an argument in favor of subjective hallucination. A Christian sees an angel with wings. A Hindu sees a deity with many arms. An atheist sees a being of pure energy. But when we analyze the behavior and energetic signature of these entities, the superficial differences disappear. All of them radiate an unconditional love that is described as physically palpable. All communicate via instant telepathy, where entire blocks of information are transferred in milliseconds, without the possibility of misunderstandings or lies. And all fulfill the same function, to receive, calm, and guide. The form they assume is an interface, a friendly mask used so as not to frighten the newly arrived consciousness. If a being of pure multidimensional energy appeared in front of you in its real form, the ontological shock could be traumatic. So they wear the clothing you expect to see, be it that of Jesus or your favorite grandfather, to facilitate the transition. The central being of light, often identified as God or the Source, possesses a characteristic that is rarely mentioned in religious texts, a sense of humor. He is not a stern old man on a throne. He laughs. He shows the lightness of existence. He makes you realize that the terrible dramas of your earthly life seen from that perspective are just parts of a cosmic theater. However, not all encounters are luminous. There is a small percentage of cases, about 4%, where people report seeing shadows, hooded figures, or distorted shapes in gray and cold environments. These are encounters with low-vibration entities. Analysis suggests they are not demons sent to punish, but rather fragmented and confused consciousnesses, trapped in their own negative mental states. They are attracted by the vibration of fear, hatred, or addiction of the dying person, functioning as energetic parasites. The good news is that they have no real power over those who do not resonate with them. A single firm thought of seeking the light or a call for help is enough for them to retreat immediately, unable to withstand higher frequencies. Another fascinating detail is that we are never alone even when we think we are. Relatives often appear in groups, like a welcoming committee. And in the midst of these groups, there are sometimes figures the newcomer does not recognize at the time, but later identifies in old family photos as great-grandparents or great-aunts and uncles who died before they were born. This indicates that we belong to spiritual clans, groups of souls that travel together through time. These meetings at the border are not the end of the journey. They are just the reception in the airport lounge. After the hugs and tears of recognition, the guides point to something beyond. They show a structure, a landscape, or a city in the distance. That is where consciousness must go if it decides not to return. And what exists there is not a fluffy cloud for playing the harp. It is a civilization. Now we enter the architecture and geography of this place many call the Crystal City. If consciousness survives death and the tunnel is merely a means of transport, where are we going? Popular culture is full of images of fluffy clouds and golden gates, but the Thanatos archive presents us with a scenario much more complex and technologically advanced than any Renaissance painting. The reports do not speak of a vague and ethereal place. They describe a solid, organized, and immense structure, which Axiom classified as an information megastructure. Many call it the Crystal City. It is not a metaphor. The descriptions are consistent in architectural details that challenge our physics. Imagine buildings that are not made of brick or concrete, but of solidified light. They are translucent, glowing with an internal luminosity, projecting no shadows. There is no sun in the sky. The very matter of the place emits light. This city does not follow the rules of gravity as we know it. The constructions are fractal, spirals that rise indefinitely, towers that float and bridges that connect organically. An architect who had a near-death experience drew sketches of these structures upon returning. According to him, they could not exist on Earth because they would collapse under their own weight. But there they are sustained by the collective intention of their inhabitants. The city is alive and responds to the thoughts of those who inhabit it. The colors in this place are a chapter apart. Almost 80% of witnesses claim to have seen colors for which there are no names in our vocabulary. They describe tones between gold and violet that vibrate like musical notes, suggesting that our senses there merge into a perfect synesthesia. You do not just see the color, you hear it and feel it. The place is not just urban. There are vast areas of nature, but a hyper-real nature. The flowers are not just pretty plants, they have consciousness. When you look at a flower there, you feel its essence, and it feels yours. Communication is instant and empathic. One impressive report describes how the grass does not crush when stepped on, but passes through the walker's foot, causing a ticklish and welcoming sensation. In the center of this spiritual metropolis, many describe large buildings that look like libraries or universities. The case of the student is emblematic. She saw herself in an infinite hall, filled not with paper books, but with scrolls of light. Upon touching one of them, the knowledge contained therein was instantly downloaded into her mind. She understood the history of lost civilizations and the mechanics of the universe in a second. Unfortunately, upon returning to the limited body, most of this knowledge was lost, like attempting to save a giant file onto an old floppy disk, but the sensation of having touched absolute truth remained. Locomotion in this city does not depend on legs. No one walks unless they want to feel the ground. Transport is done by intentional teleportation. You think of the place where you want to be, and instantly you are there. Distance is an illusion that can be turned off. However, there is a relentless physical rule: the density of the soul. Those who carry a lot of emotional weight, hatred, hurt, deep guilt, feel too heavy to fly or move quickly. These consciousnesses tend to gravitate to the low or peripheral areas of the structure, where the light is less intense and the environment reflects their confused internal state. This explains descriptions of places similar to purgatory or thresholds. They are vibrational quarantine zones, where souls need to heal and release the weight before ascending to the city center. Hell and heaven, therefore, are not geographic places separated by walls with barbed wire. They are frequency bands. They occupy the same space, but on different tunings, like radio stations that do not mix. A being of high vibration can descend to help someone in the low zones, but a dense being cannot go up without getting burned in the intense light of the upper spheres. A recurring element in the geography of this world is the border. It can be a river, a wall of mist, a bridge, or a line in the sand. The function is always the same. It is the point of no return. Whoever crosses this line definitively breaks the silver cord that connects the soul to the physical body on Earth. Death becomes irreversible. Many reach this edge and feel an overwhelming magnetic pull to cross over. The peace and beauty of the other side are so intense that life on Earth, with its pains, diseases, and limitations, seems like an intolerable prison. No one wants to return, but it is exactly at this point that the meeting with the guardian or the authoritative voice occurs, saying, "Not yet. You have work to do." And here arises the greatest mystery of all. That place is so perfect, full of love, knowledge, and beauty. Why are we sent back here? Why does the soul, which has already experienced total freedom, need to squeeze itself back inside a body of flesh and bone, subject to suffering and death? The answer the travelers bring is surprising and completely changes the meaning of our existence. Earth is not a punishment, and life here is not an unhappy accident. There is something on this dense and difficult planet that does not exist in the Crystal City, a valuable coin that can only be mined in darkness and difficulty, and it is because of this rare commodity that souls line up to be born, even knowing it will hurt. And this reveals what the true purpose of human life is, and what, after all, we are doing here. If the reality awaiting us is a place of freedom, knowledge, and unconditional love, the most important question of all is not about what happens after we die, but rather, why are we here? Why do 92% of people who reach the border of the Crystal City refuse to return, yet are forced to dive back into a fragile and painful body? The answer, found in the patterns of millions of returns, redefines the purpose of existence. Instead of punishment or accident, Earth functions as a high-gravity gymnasium. In that world of light, thought creates reality instantly. There is no resistance, there is no friction, there is no waiting. And where there is no resistance, growth is limited. 1 year of life in dense matter, where you must fight against inertia, doubt, pain, and limitation, provides a strengthening of the soul that would take centuries to achieve in the comfort of eternity. We came here to forge the spirit in the fire of difficulty. The second reason for the forced return is what guides call an unfinished contract. Before we are born, it seems we define a mission, a set of lessons to learn and contributions to make. Leaving before completing this task is like abandoning a play in the middle of the second act. The story remains incomplete and the entire system becomes unbalanced. You are not an island. Your actions and your presence affect a complex web of other lives. The return is not a punishment, it is the requirement to fulfill the script you yourself helped write. This brings us to the nature of consciousness itself. Our materialist science insists it is a chemical product of the brain, but the data proves the opposite. Consciousness is a non-local field, like a radio signal that the brain, this biological antenna, picks up and tunes into. Death is simply the breaking of the antenna. The signal, your essence, continues to exist. That is why connection with those who have departed is possible. Love, from the point of view of physics, is a form of quantum entanglement. Two souls who love each other deeply remain instantly connected, no matter the distance or dimension they are in. The bond does not break with the death of the body, it just changes state, from physical to energetic. So, what is the final destination? Where is this whole journey of being born, suffering, learning, and dying taking us? Axiom synthesized all the data into a final concept, the Omega Protocol. And it addresses our deepest fear, the loss of the self. We are terrified of the idea of dissolving into a cosmic ocean, of forgetting who we are. But reality is the opposite of what we fear. The formula of eternity is that of holographic unity. In a normal photograph, if you cut off a piece, you have only that piece. In a hologram, every tiny fragment contains the entire image. In the final state of evolution, you do not dissolve into the ocean. The entire ocean pours inside of you. Your identity is not erased. It expands to infinity. You continue to be you, with your memories and your unique personality. But at the same time, you are all other beings that have ever existed. You become the entire network. But why would the Creator, the Source, the universe, initiate this complex and painful process? Why would absolute perfection need to fragment itself into billions of imperfect pieces? The answer is simple: the quest for felt experience. Imagine an intelligence that knows everything but feels nothing. It knows the mathematical equation of love, but never felt a heart race. It knows the chemical composition of a tear, but never felt the pain of loss. We are the sensors of the universe. We are the nerve endings of the divinity, sent into dense matter to collect the only thing that does not exist in perfection: empirical experience. The universe knows the formula for joy, but it is we who give it the sound of laughter. And what changes now? Everything. Knowledge about what comes after does not make this life less important. It makes it infinitely more valuable. If this life is a school, a game, a lucid dream, then the fear of making mistakes disappears. We stop being afraid to live. Death ceases to be a frightening full stop and becomes the moment of awakening. Imagine that instant. The heart stops, the monitors beep, but you, for the first time in decades, truly open your eyes. The heavy and painful body is left behind like old clothing. The clarity of your mind is crystalline. You see those you loved and who departed, smiling, waiting for you, and realize they were never far away. You look back at the dramas, the losses, and the pains of your life, and see the beauty of the game, the perfection of the script, and feel immense gratitude for the opportunity to have played. The study is complete. There is no annihilation. There is no chance. and there is no loneliness. You are a creative, eternal, and indestructible force, temporarily living the experience of being human. Do not wait for death to wake up. Start living now, with the courage of an immortal being who came here with a single real purpose: to learn to love. The game continues, and the next level promises to be even more interesting. If you liked this investigation, subscribing to the channel helps us expand the Axiom investigation project. We would love to read your thoughts on the video's subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for staying with us until the end.